In this video, I'm going to share with you how to update the firmware on this MSI MAG 271 QPX, how to install the drivers, the settings that I am using. And if you don't have this monitor, I will share with you in general how I changed the game's HDR to be perfect, depending on the display that I am using. And when I say perfect, I am not talking about reference accuracy, okay? In my opinion, that is completely irrelevant when you have to change the games, okay? So when you start changing the creator's intent, you become the creator of your own visual experience. And I think that is what gaming is all about, okay? So there's not a single game I can remember right now that I just open it and I'm like, oh, this is perfect. I don't have to change anything. HDR just works. Not gonna happen, okay? Now, of course, it is better if your display has at least an accurate white balance because it looks better. But aside from that, you have to make sure for every single game that near black visibility is good. You don't have black level rays, but you're not crushing blacks either. You have to make sure that the highlights are visible, that you are not clipping the highlights. You also want to get these games to be a little bit more colorful. Sometimes it's like you have HDR with SDR colors only. Okay, so especially if you have one of these QDOLEDs, you're living visual experience on the table, okay? You're not seeing those QDOLED colors, which are absolutely amazing. Now, I have to say, specifically, this MSI QDOLED has a lot of very good updates, and I absolutely love that. I'm like, okay, they are listening, or they at least know what's going on. Because, for example, this MSI MAG 271 QPX is a 360 Hz 1440p QD-OLED monitor, and it has HDMI 2.1 and DisplayPort, but it comes with DSC, display string compression. And because of that, you cannot use some NVIDIA features if you have an older GPU. Now with the new 50,000 series, you can actually use DLDSR and NVIDIA image scaling. But if you don't, like I want a 5090, but I don't have it right now. So I have a 3080 12 gigabytes. So to use DLDSR, that doesn't work with DSC. So I have to turn that off. And by default, this monitor out of the box doesn't have that option. So if you update the firmware, you get that option, which is very, very important. Right now, for example, this is Resident Evil Village, which doesn't support DLSS or the best FSR. And at 1440p, you might see some shimmering, and that might be a deal breaker for you. And then you cannot use DLDSR to get more pixels. Now with the firmware update, you can actually turn off DLDSR and you can still get 1440p 240 Hz, which is very usable in many games where you cannot get more than 240 frames because you are CPU bound, for example. Or you care more about fixing the aliasing and the lack of pixels. So with this firmware update, I can turn off DSC, and I am using right now 4K. So 1440p multiplied by 2.25x, that is 4K. As you can see here, 3840 by 2160 at 240 Hz. That is NVIDIA DLDSR. And here's the thing. It is less demanding to use NVIDIA DLDSR than to use true native 4K in a 4K monitor. Of course, this doesn't look as good, but it performs a little bit better. So this is very good, and it's a very usable setting. You turn it off, so I'm going to show you here. So you come now on the monitor. After the update, I'm going to show you how to update the firmware. You come here on the monitor to gaming, and you have this DSC option that you can turn it off. Very important. Of course, most of the time, I much rather have 360 FPS to take full advantage of this monitor. But if I cannot get that, I much rather turn that off. Okay, so that's one thing that was very important with the firmware update. But we also have other settings. For example, we now have this FreeSync Premium Pro, which was not present. So before that, it said adaptive sync. So this is supposed to be better. I don't know. I don't see any difference. And also we have this HDMI 2.1 setting with PC and console option. So of course I have that set up to PC. Let's see what other changes we have here. On HDR, so on image display HDR, we still have the same True Black 400, which is the one I would recommend for this monitor for the most part. And we have peak 1000 nits. But based on the firmware update fact, they improve the EOTF tracking, which is something I cannot confirm. I don't see really a big difference, but it is supposedly better now. There's still the 1000 nits mode is under tracking the EOTF, in my opinion. When I compare that with the 400 mode, or when I compare that with my S90D on HDR. So I much rather use the 400 nits mode because you also have more full screen brightness, a little bit more full screen brightness, which is very, very nice. And we also have, there's another setting that's very important, which was the main reason why I updated the firmware on this monitor, was to turn off this power LED here, which is so terrible. If you are using the monitor in a dark room, you have a very bright white light here all the time. So now with the new firmware update, you can turn that off. I was going to use a black tape, which is of course not an elegant solution, to say the least. So we have new options. Also, I'm going to show you how you can, okay, let me show you here before I close the game. This is Resident Evil Village. I'm liking the game actually very, very much. It looks very good. It performs very good. It doesn't look blurry at all. It looks fantastic actually with just TAA. It looks sharp. It seems like it is not accumulating too many frames. It feels very responsive. I really, really like this game. So that's Resident Evil Village 4K. Without DLDSR, I get way over 200 frames. It performs a lot better, but I do see some shimmering. So it's just an option to have. Now, let me close the game and show you how to update the firmware of the monitor, how to install the drivers of the monitor, which you can download from the same MSI site, and how to use an app that this monitor has to tweak the picture. Because I was complaining when my first impressions, I'm like, this monitor on HDR has no settings. Like I don't have any control over the black level, contrast, brightness, and those are basic settings that should be available on every single display. Well, we still don't have those options on the monitor itself, but we have a proprietary app that we can use to change those settings. So I will show you how to do that too. Now here's the NVIDIA control panel with DSC off. As you can see, I'm using HDMI. With HDMI, you have a bigger bandwidth. So you have more options when it comes to a refresh rate. You can get 12 bits at 360 Hertz with DSC, and without DSC, you can get 240 Hertz at 1440p, full RGB, 12 bits per color. So I would use HDMI 2.1 instead if you have that option. So here you can also see I have dynamic super resolution. This is DLDSR 1.78x 3413 by 1920. That's a small bump up in resolution. And we also have the 4K with DLDSR. And let me show you here, when we go to manage 3D settings, you can see here DSR factors, and they are on. Now, of course, with this smoothness percentage, you can play around up and down to get the result that you're looking for. Now I'm gonna show you how to get this app and the rest of it. So now we're gonna come here to this MSI page, link in the description of the video. And here we're going to download first the drivers for the monitor, and I'll show you how to install that. So you download that, it's this monitor driver. To install that, we're going to go to the device manager. So we come here, actually let me stop for a moment. Okay, so I stopped for a moment to restart the PC because it was not responding. I don't know why, hard closed the game. So here we are. This is the device manager. After we download the drivers, so these drivers for the monitor, all we have to do is go to device manager. Let's go window, type in device manager, and come here under monitors and right click update drivers, and then you're going to search where the drivers are. Of course, it's a zip file. You unzip that and that's it. So now I am not sure if this is going to do anything, because when you look at the drivers, it's like an ICC profile. And when you are using the HDR calibration app, that creates an ICC profile. So you either have one or the other. So I'm not sure if this is going to do anything, but just in case, install the drivers from the site. So that's the first thing that I would do. Then the second thing is get the utility, download the utility, which is basically this program that is going to allow you to change some settings. Okay, so now here's where I'm going to recommend you these settings. Now these settings are not for accuracy. This is because my monitor is crushing blacks in the 400 nits mode. So I don't want to crush blacks. I can always fix that with the game settings, but I want all the shadow detail to be visible. But of course, you don't want to overdo it, because then you don't have perfect black. So that is something that I check for when changing these settings. Completely dark room. I let my eyes rest so I can analyze the darkness. Okay, make sure that I am not getting raised blacks. Now the thing is, it is not 51 and 48 and you are done, because from 50 to 51 there are some steps that are hidden. So I wish, instead of them just doing this, 51 to 100, from 0 to 100, I wish they had more granularity, because it makes a big difference. Like if I can keep going right or left, it's still 51 and it's completely different, the results. So this needs more granularity, and that would be a feedback that I have for MSI, because the settings I'm going to recommend to you here, you cannot see them. Like this is it's not 51 or 48. I'm going to tell you exactly how many clicks you have to go to the right or to the left. So actually, let me look for that document, because I saved that in a notepad. Now these settings are for the 400 nits, HDR 400 nits mode, which is actually close to 450 nits. I do not have an instrument to measure exactly what it is, what the actual brightness is, but I target 450 nits. So basically, the games or the HDR calibration app or any video that you open will be clipping at 450 nits with these settings. I don't think it should be different with a different unit, but test it yourself using near black test patterns and white clipping test patterns, okay? So what I did here was basically the contrast setting. I give it 2 clicks, so you can use the arrows of your keyboard. 2 clicks to the right. Sorry. So the contrast is 3 clicks to the left of 49. Okay. So what that means is right now, if I do 3 clicks to the right, it should be 49. So let's see. 1, 2, 3. There you go. So once you get to 49, once you get to the last 49, so once you go 1 to the left, oh, that's 48. You go back to 49, then you do 3 clicks to the left. 1, 2, 3. That's the setting. So I'm gonna do it from the get. Well, here's the thing. Here's how it works. So you're like this. Okay, you go to the left. Oh, wait. You go to the left. Boom, 49. Once you are there, you keep going to the left. Oh, change to 48. Okay, I'm gonna go to 49. And now 1, 2, 3. That's what I did. Again, you go 49, 49. That's 48. Go back to 49 and then 1, 2, 3. Very important. If you do one less, then you might be still crushing blacks. If you do one more to the left, you have black level raise. Okay, so this level of detail might change depending on your monitor. Maybe it will change on my own monitor because it is still fairly new. So you have to test it yourself. How do you test this? I'm going to have a link in the description of the video for you to download some HDR test patterns. Those are videos with near black test patterns, white clipping, color clipping test patterns, uniformity, many HDR test patterns. So that's what I use to do this. Also, the HDR calibration app is a good place. You can just have a black background like I do, and then just check with that. But make sure the lights are off, completely off. So you can have your nose on the screen and make sure that you're not raising the black floor. Again, the reason why I did this is because the monitor is crushing blacks on the 400 nits mode. And then the other thing that I did was to increase the brightness to, when you increase the brightness, you make it clip. It will be clipping more. So I wanted to clip at 450. That's not more accurate. That is not even better. I wanted to clip at 450 just to have that number very, very clear. And it might be worse to do that than to keep it at default. Definitely, I want to see all the shadow details. So for me, that's better. If it changes the EOTF tracking, it is less accurate, I don't care. If it's crushing blacks, I think that's a problem. But here, you might not want to do this part, but they work together. So if you don't do this part, then you have to just do the contrast by itself and check. So what I did with the brightness was 2 clicks to the right of 50. So what that means, let's go to the left, that's 50. So you basically start going to the right, boom, that's 51. Okay, go back to 50, and now do 2 clicks to the right, 1, 2. Again, you're at 50 at the beginning, you go to start going to the right, oh, that's 51, go back to 50, 1, 2. That's the setting that I'm using. Very important. So now this personal setting on the monitor is user. So you go to gaming, I am using the user setting because this premium color, which is the setting that the monitor is defaulting to, is overly saturated, in my opinion. So I am not sure if when I am using this user, I am reducing the color gamut a little bit. That is possible. But the thing is that premium color setting looks overly saturated. It looks very wrong to me, especially when I compare that with my S90D. So this is a lot closer. I don't think we are losing color gamut, color saturation with this user setting, but it is a possibility. I do see like a minor change, but I think this is just unusable to me. This premium color is just way too much. And the rest of the settings they come with a sharpness. So I don't want to do any sharpness, any edge enhancement from the monitor itself. I don't want to do that. So I'm using this FreeSync Premium Pro. Right now DSC is off, but I would turn it on for 360 HDMI PC. And then this professional is user. So I think this is actually the personal setting thing, the user here. But I'm not sure. Maybe this is unattached from this. But I think that's what it is, this personal setting. So that's what I'm using on the monitor. And of course, the HDR True Black 400 is the setting that I am using. So after doing that, the result is basically I have all the shadow detail. I still have perfect blacks. And the monitor is clipping at 450. So if I open the HDR calibration app, for example, or any white clipping pattern, you go all the way to the left, 0 on the HDR calibration app. You go next, you go up to 450. This happens when you use a high contrast theme on Windows. So you have to turn it off to use the HDR calibration app, because then these things disappear. It's like a bug. So with the HDR calibration app, I'm going to the right and it will disappear at 450 nits. Okay, so 450 here, 450 on the next one, 450 on the next one, 0 here, and then you save that profile and you apply that profile under display settings. So you go to display settings. Of course, I'm not gonna do it here because I already did, but you go to display settings. Let me go there. So you right click display settings, right click on the desktop display settings, and then you come here to color profile, and that should be applied. So I name it 450, and so that's the one I am using for HDR now. This slider, this SDR slider here, only matters for SDR content. So if you open the game, you have auto HDR off, you have RTX HDR off, then this slider is the one that works. Now, to be clear, 450 nits, that's not a lot. This slider max out is actually 498 max CLL. So it's almost 500 nits. So if you don't want to, if you don't want to mess around with auto HDR, native HDR settings, major paint the cactus, special K, if you don't want to be, doing any HDR tweaks, you can just do this. Just turn off auto HDR, turn off RTX HDR, turn off the HDR from the game, and you just come here and increase this. I forgot 450. Actually, I have to test it. I don't remember. So max out is 500. So you would have to reduce that a little bit to, well, in that case, if you're gonna do that setup, maybe change here this so it clips at 500. That would be an option. But the other option is you just reduce this until you get 450. Now, how do you know? Easy. You do this, and then you take a screenshot. Well, actually, I can do that. Let me show you. Okay, so here's what I did. I took a screenshot using the NVIDIA overlay. So you just turn on the NVIDIA overlay on the new NVIDIA app. Let me show you that. So you open the NVIDIA app, you come down here to settings and turn on NVIDIA overlay. So once you do that, you press Alt Z, and then you take a screenshot with Alt F1, and then go to a screenshot, and you're gonna open a screenshot with the HDR WCG image viewer app, which you can get on the Microsoft Store. HDR WCG image viewer app. So with this app, I can see here MAG CLL 401 nits. So that was with the slider at 85%. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna increase this to, let's say 90, because I'm looking for 450. So I'll increase it to 90, open the overlay, take another screenshot, come here to the screenshot, open that. So that's 424. So we need more than that. I'm going to increase it to 95. So in 95, I'm going to take another screenshot. So I'm going to open this one. 447. There you go. MAG CLL 447. So if you don't want to be messing around with HDR because you're like, okay, 450 nits, that's not HDR anyway. You want to be under the HDR mode of the monitor because it's brighter than the SDR. So it looks better. You definitely want to be on HDR on the monitor. We are like, okay, I don't want to be messing around with settings for games. I just want to be using the monitor. It works for everything. Not a single problem. Well, unless the SDR of the game looks washed out. And we have those cases. Black Myth Wukong, for example. So in those cases, you would have to fix the color grading of the game using the PD8001 correct color shader, which I share, link in the description of the video. So you would have to do that. Yeah, that's an extra thing. But if you're okay with the base SDR image of the game, you can just open the game on SDR, turn off HDR on the game, turn off Auto HDR, turn off RTX HDR. You set this to 95. That's gonna be like 450 nits with these settings I share with you. And if the game is originally Gamma sRGB, it will look perfect. You don't have to do anything. But if the game is originally Gamma 2.2, which is most of the games, then you do have to do something. You have to use a program that I share, link in the description of the video. So you would have to follow that guide. I don't want to make this video huge, so check that video out. I already explained how to do that. So basically your setup would be, you try the game, oh, it looks washed out. The near black is too bright. You just have to double click that app after you set it up. So check that video. And so you just click that app, and that works for most of the games. But if you open the games and they look like they're crushing blacks, then you have to revert what that app does, which is basically a transformation. So it looks good. So that would be a possibility. Now the other possibility would be use Windows 11 Auto HDR. If you use Windows 11 Auto HDR, that will work with the HDR calibration app. So that ICC profile that we created here, that's 450 nits, that's gonna work with the Windows 11 Auto HDR. And you still have to do the same thing with that app that I'm talking about, that if it looks washed out, you have to apply that fix. You have to do that for Windows 11 Auto HDR. So it is very important that you learn how to do that part, because it works for Windows 11 Auto HDR and it works for SDR, HDR content, okay? Very important. Now, what about RTX HDR? For RTX HDR, you can only use RTX HDR for originally Gamma 2.2 games. For those games that are originally sRGB, RTX HDR looks too dark. It's going to crush blacks. So if you ever try RTX HDR in a game, like for example, the GTA trilogy, San Andreas, any of these games, you use RTX HDR and it's gonna be super dark, too dark. That's because those games are originally SDR sRGB. For those games, you can, for example, just use Auto HDR without any fix. Windows 11 Auto HDR, no fix. The near black is going to be perfect because no fix Windows 11 Auto HDR is for originally Gamma sRGB. Or you can do the SDR HDR, a trick. So no Windows 11 Auto HDR, no RTX HDR. You can do that. Otherwise, you cannot use RTX HDR in those cases. For those cases, you have to use Windows 11 Auto HDR or do this. Or use native HDR if they support it. Or use Major Paint the Cactus add-on to reshade, which I already share how it works. Link in the description of the video. I'm going to have a bunch of links in the description of this video to cover everything. So that would be my setup. Of course, I would use the native HDR. Let me show you, for example, Spider-Man. Oh, before we go there, I forgot. So I show you how to install the drivers of the monitor, how to install the utility. Now we also want to download the firmware update utility and download the latest firmware updates, okay? So what I did is I download them all because I didn't know if I could just install the latest firmware and that was it, or if I had to install one by one up to the latest one. So what I did is I downloaded all of them, then I unzip all of them, then with the firmware update utility, you just have to open it and you have to make sure you connect the monitor with display port. So no HDMI outputs from your GPU should be used. Only display port, otherwise you get an error here. And it happened to me. So only display port from the GPU to the monitor. And then you're gonna come here to load file. You go to the folder where you have the firmware update files, and then you just click auto. You let that run. It takes like 10 minutes. Then after that, it's gonna ask you to turn off the monitor, and it's gonna ask you to unplug the monitor from power for a moment, like a minute, and then plug it back in, turn it on, and you will see the changes to the menus with all the updates applied. That's how you do the firmware update. Now, before we go to the HDR example, I'm gonna show you with Spider-Man. We can read here the firmware updates, the changes that they did. This adaptive sync was changed to FreeSync Premium Pro. Very important. After you do the firmware update, make sure you go to the protection mechanisms and you turn them off. Well, if you want to. I mean, I would turn them off, all of them. The only one you cannot turn off is this pixel shift, which I have in slow, and so far it's not bothering me, but I would like to turn it off. So because after the latest firmware update, one of the changes that they did is that they actually turned off all the protection for the monitor. And I understand they are giving you 3 years of burning warranty, which is crazy. It's just, so I understand they want to make sure you don't burn it in, but I don't think it's a problem. So I turn all of this off. This was on. After the firmware update, all of this protection was on, and I turn it off, all of them. So yeah, just make sure you do that. You also have another option of 24.5 inch option here on the menu, which was not there before. So we go here to a screen size, and now we have this 24.5 inch option. For those competitive players that need a smaller screen size, they can just turn that on and it's going to give them that screen size. So that was another improvement, and the rest of the improvements I kind of touched on them. So you can read them here from the site. Now let me show you just an example. After changing, after the updates, after everything that I've explained, let me show you Spider-Man 2 HDR settings as an example. Now, for example, this game HDR is not great, and it actually has some tone mapping issues. Because, for example, if you come here to the paper white, if you lower this paper white like to 250 or something like that, you will see that you're clipping the clouds. You're clipping the highlight details, which is weird. That shouldn't be happening. So depending on your target, for example, if we were going to set it to 450 nits here, 450, you cannot come here and set it to 200 or 200, even 250. I think you have to max that out. Otherwise, you get some clipping on the highlights. So at the end, no matter what you do with the game's HDR or which method you are using, you have to use your eyes ultimately. You have to, get used to good looking HDR so you know what that looks like, so you can change the settings to get the best results. So in this case, what I'm doing is I am maxing out this HDR from the game because I detected that the game has some issues with the tone mapping, so I don't want the game to be doing any tone mapping if possible. So I maxed that out, and then I'm using reshade to take care of the HDR. And also I am using reshade to get more colors, to get more HDR colors, because this game is almost all the colors are SDR, and this is a QDOLED monitor, which is fantastic. It's gonna give you fantastic looking colors, and this game is just not, it's not giving me that ferociousness that I'm looking for. So then it's also not very bright either. So I increase this brightness to 70. And then the thing is, you have to make sure when you do that, the black floor is still perfect, and it is. So I'm still getting perfect blacks in the game. So what I'm doing here with reshade is I am using the advanced auto HDR. When you install reshade on the game, you search for Pumbo, P-U-M-B-O, Pumbo, advanced auto HDR, and it is this shader here called advanced auto HDR. So now with this shader, you can get auto HDR from SDR if you want, so you can turn off the native HDR. That might look very good. I have not tested all the options for this game. We have many options. This is just one of them that I tried. It looks good. So with this, I am doing the tone mapping. So I have this HDR tone mapping setting. Actually, let me increase the size here so you see this. We have this HDR tone mapping setting. I turn it on and I selected 450 nits. Okay, so that's gonna give me a max CLL of 450, which is exactly what I'm looking for. And then the other thing that I'm doing here is getting that extra HDR color saturation with this setting that we have here called extra HDR saturation. And if you click over here, it's telling you that it generates HDR colors BT2020 from bright saturated SDR. So the default is 0. The max value is 1. I set it to 0.5. But feel free to max that out if you want to just blast all the colors. So that's what I'm doing for this game so far. But again, I would recommend you to try RTX HDR, try Major Paint the Cactus. I tried that, the game crashes, so it doesn't work. The Major Paint the Cactus add-on to reshade doesn't work on this one. You can try Special K. I will explore again a Special K. I was not a big fan of it because there's a lot of tweakings to get the results that I was looking for, but I will check it out again and make another video about Special K. You can try the SDR HDR trick, which is basically just turn off HDR and max out, set the SDR HDR slider to 95. You can do auto HDR from Windows 11. Make sure to check if the game is originally sRGB or originally Gamma 2.2. Again, how can you check that? You turn off HDR, turn off Auto HDR and RTX HDR. Just open the game on SDR, but HDR is on Windows. And look at the shadows. If they are way too bright, then the game is originally Gamma 2.2. If they look right, then the game is originally sRGB and you don't have to do anything. If it is too bright, you have to apply the fix that I talk about, link in the description of the video, which is that app that it's like a transformation to fix that gamma issue. And if you're gonna use Windows 11 Auto HDR, the same applies. You have to make sure you check the near black. If it looks perfect, then it is originally sRGB. If it looks way too bright, then it is originally Gamma 2.2, and you have to apply the same fix for Windows 11 Auto HDR. If you try RTX HDR and it is way too dark, then it's because the game was originally SDR sRGB. Okay? Why we have this mess with the games, and it is what it is. That's what we've learned so far. We learned how to figure out how to get a good, consistent result on these games. So now this looks very good. I'm happy with it, but I might try something different later. So far, this is looking pretty good. And now with this settings I share, we have the ability to use 4K, 240 Hertz. This is DLSR resolution. We can do, we need a lot more power for that. This game is very hard to run. But yeah, let me know your thoughts and opinions if you have any questions. If you have this MSI MAG 271 QPX 360 Hz QDOLED monitor, absolutely amazing. I have to say, I'm looking forward to get that 5090 to really utilize this monitor. It's just gonna be amazing. Of course, I'm gonna need also a monster CPU if I want to push 360 frames without frame generation or multiple frame generation. But that's actually gonna be, I think, the most realistic way. Even a game like this with a 9800X3D, you cannot get to 360 frames per second. It's impossible. So multiple frame generation is the only thing that will allow me to actually use this. That's why I'm looking forward to get my 5090. So let me know your thoughts and opinions, and if you have any questions.